From this we see that a sustained and one-pointed resolve to find the real self, which is the highest and purest form of devotion, is the means of winning that self. This is in accord with the text of the ancient revelation which says, "He alone shall find this self who is powerfully attracted to him in complete devotion. To him that self reveals himself as he really is." That was from the Katha Upanishad. This is the highest truth of all religions. It was differently expressed by Jesus, who said, "Ask, and it shall be given. Knock, and it shall be opened." It is this very path that the sage teaches in his answers to disciples and in his writings. In one of the latter, he calls it the direct path for all, by which all the problems of life are transcended. The state that is won by pursuing this path is called the natural state, sahaja bhava. It is so called because therein the self is manifest as he really is, and not as he appears to the ignorant. It is also described as the egoless state, or the mindless state. The truth of that state, as revealed by the sage and by the ancient revelation, is the subject of a latter chapter. Here it is enough to say that the natural state is the highest there is, that for one that has attained that state, there is nothing else to be striven for. For him, the pilgrimage of life is at an end. Ramana had by this direct experience become a sage, or rather the sage that was always in him became unveiled. For him, therefore, there could be no further evolution in spirituality. Mind and body are by this direct experience completely disassociated from the self. That is to say, the mind no longer identifies the body with the self. Ignorance being just this identification and nothing more, and the mind itself, as will be seen later, being an outcome of this ignorance, so this great event is also called the destruction or dissolution of the mind. Hence it is strictly true that for the sage there is no mind, nor body, nor world. But that does not mean that body and mind are destroyed in the sense that other people will cease to see them. For them, the sage's body and mind will continue to appear, and they would appear to be affected by events, and hence there can be a further history of the sage. The sage himself may seemingly be active in diverse ways, though these actions are not really his. Hence the course of events that occurred after this great event, some of which are narrated here, do not really belong to the sage. They do not affect him in any way. Because Ramana had never read about nor heard of the nameless, formless, indescribable, known to the learned as Brahman, the absolute consciousness, he had no doubts as to the nature of the state which he won by this event, or profound direct experience. Later, when he came to know that the sacred books describe the state of deliverance as that in which the self is experienced as identical with reality, he had not the least difficulty in understanding that he himself had attained that state. Whatever occurred in the life of the sage after this great event concerns only the body and the mind that apparently survived the event, and not the sage himself. The divine qualities and powers which are inherent to the natural state became soon manifest, since their exercise was necessary for the fulfillment of the sage's mission in the world. Thus it happened that immediately after this great event, in the intervals when his mind was not wholly absorbed in the natural state, it began to feel a need of some object to take hold of. The only object that was acceptable was God, in whose love the 63 saints had found their highest happiness. So Ramana began to frequent the temple more often than before, and there, in the presence of God, he would stand while floods of tears streamed from his eyes, such tears as can flow only from the eyes of the most ardent of devotees. It is ever the earnest prayer of all devotees that they may have such profound devotion as this, for they consider that a copious flow of tears is a manifestation of the highest devotion, which itself is the fruit of divine grace. We can understand this manifestation in Ramana only if we suppose that in a previous life he had been such a great devotee. Also, these floods of tears might have, in this case, fulfilled some divine purpose. For the tears of divine love are purifying, and those that shed them are exalted thereby. The vehicles of consciousness are thereby transformed. So we may presume that in this way the body and the mind of Ramana underwent changes which made them worthy to serve as the abode of a great teacher, a true messenger of God. Along with these manifestations, there was also at the time an acute sensation of heat in the body. All these manifestations continued until the sage arrived at Tiruvannamalai and found himself in the presence in the temple there. We are told of a similar sensation of heat in the case of Sri Ramakrishna. We saw that as a student, Ramana was annoyingly backward. Now he became worse than ever, for he was frequently lapsing into that mysterious state which he had won by his effortless quest of the real self. When he was out of it, he had not the least inclination for studies. His elders could not understand what it was that had occurred to the boy. They had always been inclined to be angry with him for his aversion to study, and now they were provoked more than ever. His elder brother, who was himself a student then, was greatly irritated by these new ways of his. One day, about 6 weeks after the great event and direct experience of the egoless state, the brother saw him going into it when he ought to have been learning his lessons. This provoked a stinging remark from the elder one, who said, "What is the use of these things and books and stuff belonging to a student, to one that is thus?" The words went home, but the effect they produced was not what the speaker intended. At the time, the boy just smiled and resumed his book. But inwardly he began to see, yes, he is right. What is the use of books and school for me now? Immediately the idea took shape in his mind that he must leave his home and go and live far away, unknown to those that claimed him as their own. He had learned before this that his beloved Arunachala is the same as Tiruvannamalai, a well-known place of pilgrimage. He had learned this from a relative that had returned from a pilgrimage and told him in answer to a question that he had been to Arunachala. This was a great surprise for the lad, who had never imagined that Arunachala was a place on this earth. The relative then explained to him that Arunachala is only another name for Tiruvannamalai. In Arunachala, the Sanskrit name from the hill, is regarded as God's image, and the Tamil form of it is called Annamalai. Tiru is prefixed to the name to show that the place is holy. Thus, Tamil name of the place is Tiru Annamalai, which is pronounced Tiruvannamalai. And this place was far enough away from Madurai for his present purposes, but not too far for him to reach. So he decided to leave home secretly and go there, and thereafter do as he may be guided by Providence. Fortune favored his enterprise, as his elder brother's school fee for the month had not yet been paid, and he left 5 rupees and was told his brother to pay for the school. Out of this he took just 3 rupees, thinking this would suffice for his journey by rail. The remainder he left with a letter expressing his decision to go away in quest of his divine father, and insisting that no search should be made for him. He purchased a ticket and got on the train at Madurai, but as soon as he had taken his seat, he fell into the egoless state and was in it nearly all the time. He had hardly any appetite during the journey and ate next to nothing. He had made a mistake in planning his journey, but this was providentially set right. He had to walk part of the way because he had no money left. But on the way he obtained some money by pledging his golden ear ornaments and reached Tiruvannamalai by rail. At once he went to the presence in the temple and cried in ecstasy, "Father, I have come just according to thy command." And at once the burning heat in the body disappeared, and therewith the sense of something being lacking. Also, there was not any more flow of tears after this except once, when much later he was composing a devotional hymn for the use of his disciples, which is one of the 5 hymns of Arunachala. Going out of the temple, he made a complete change in his externals, but this he did in a mechanical way, without thinking and making decisions. A barber's services were offered, and presently the lad had a complete shave on his head. He reduced his dress to a kaupan or codpiece loincloth, and he threw on the steps of the tank the remainder of the cash, clothes, and whatever else he had brought with him from his last place of halt on the journey. All this was done with the conviction that the body was not himself, and did not deserve to be treated as of any importance. He even omitted the bath that invariably follows a shave, but a sudden shower of rain drenched him on his way back to the temple. For long after this he had no fixed place of abode. He just sat in any place in which he could remain in the egoless state without disturbance from curious or mischievous people. For long periods he was totally unconscious of the body and its environment. The people who observed his ways took it that he was a recluse who had taken a vow of silence, and so they did not try to make him speak, and he did nothing to undeceive them. He simply remained silent. And this accidental silence continued for many years, so that in course of time he lost the ability to speak normally. Later, when disciples came to him and he had to answer their questions, he had to write his answers at first. But after a time he recovered speech, not without some effort. He never lacked food, for the people recognized his exalted spirituality and were eager to supply his needs, so that they might gain the merit of serving a Holy One. But he had, in the beginning, some trouble with mischievous boys, which, however, did not disturb his inner peace. Soon after coming to Tiruvannamalai, as a result of his continuous experience of egoless state, he realized the truth of the highest of the ancient revelation, "I and my Father are one," and became a perfect sage. Now he no longer needed to enter into himself in order to enjoy the happiness of the real self. He had it all the time, whether he was aware of the world or not. He thus became able to fulfill his mission in the world as a messenger of God, or as the real self, there being no God but that self. It is this state of uninterrupted experience of the real self which is known as the natural state, Sahaja Bhava. The vigorous search for the missing boy that was made by his family proved a failure, but some years after his flight they came to know by mere accident that he was at Tiruvannamalai. First his uncle and then his mother came to him and importuned him to come back and live near them, if he would not live with them, but they could make no impression on him. It was as if he did not recognize their claims on him. Such claims were founded on the assumption that his body was himself. Much later, his mother and younger brother, at that time the sole surviving brother, came to live with him, and he let them do so. He took advantage of this opportunity to instruct and guide his mother on the path to spiritual perfection. On various occasions during the early part of his life at Tiruvannamalai, the sage passed through many kinds of trials, but nothing could ruffle his peace of mind. He exemplifies in himself the truth expressed in the Gita and other sacred books, that the man who is firmly established in the egoless state will not be moved from it by the severest trials. The correct explanation seems to be that the events of the external world, including even what happens to the body, are not real to the sage, for he dwells in the state of unassailable happiness, a happiness which is so abundant that it radiates around him, draws to him disciples and devotees, and attaches them to him for life. Indeed, many of them look upon him as God in human form. It is a curious fact about this sage that he had never had any book knowledge concerning the real self. The ancient lore, which reveals as much of the truth of that self as can be expressed in words, never came his way, nor was he initiated by anyone into the secrets of that lore, nor did he even know that there was any such lore, till long after he had won the state, which is their subject matter. But when disciples came to him, and some of them wanted light on the inner sense of certain obscure passages in the sacred lore, he had to read those books, and he understood their hidden meanings with perfect ease, because those books describe just that very state, the egoless state, which he was constantly enjoying as his own. Thus, he was able to give out the correct sense of those passages, a sense that is beyond the grasp of the most diligent students of that lore. Thus it happens that this sage is an exception to the general rule of the ancient lore, that every aspirant to the state of deliverance must become a disciple of a competent teacher and be initiated by him into the mysteries, and this competent teacher is termed a guru. Another instructive feature of the sage is that he teaches more by silence than by word of mouth. Visitors come to him from far and near with bundles of questions, but when they take their seats in his presence, after making due obeisance, they forget to put their questions, and after a time they find that the questions have evaporated. The would-be questioner either realizes that the questions need no answer, or finds the answers in himself. The sage, however, quite readily answers any question that is not purely worldly, and when he does answer, his words are clear but brief. And as a rule, his teachings are free from the technical terms that abound in most of the books. And as he speaks, so he writes. That may be taken as a proof that he speaks from his own experience, not from a knowledge of books. The learned man cannot talk without using the phraseology of the books he has studied. It may be said that the books master the man, and not man the books. The sage has written a few books, which are all very brief, but full of meaning. But these he wrote not because he himself wanted to write books, but because he was importuned by certain disciples, who were eager to have a revelation from the sage himself, not being content with the extant sacred lore. He has also, at the request of his disciples, translated some of the older sacred lore into Tamil. The disciples of this sage are in a stronger position than those who have to rely on the sacred lore of the past. Answers that the sage have given orally to questions put to him have also been recorded by disciples. Disciples come to the sage from all over the world, and they profit by his silent influence as well as his teachings, according to the intensity of their desire for deliverance from bondage. Their impressions about him vary according to their mentality, but all recognize that he is a unique one, worthy of profound veneration. What is the secret of this power in him? The answer is that he has attained that state of deliverance which everyone aspires to, more or less earnestly. Some also find in his presence a foretaste of that state of being. One particular trait that marks him out as unique is the fact that neither praise nor censure has any effect on him. He is neither pleased to hear praise of himself, nor pained by words of censure or detraction. This may not seem to be very important, but the fact is that other perfections of character are to be seen in varying degree in almost any good man, but not so this particular trait. Indeed, this is the one trait by which the sage can be recognized. It is pointed out that even the most saintly of men, if they have not won the egoless state, react just like common men to praise and blame. So long as even a trace of ego remains, it is impossible not to be affected by praise or blame. Only the sage in the egoless state is unaffected by them. Being egoless, the sage sees no distinction between himself and others, nor between one person and another. For him, neither sex, nor fortune, nor social status has any existence. His sense of equality is absolute. Even animals, dogs and cats and birds and squirrels, he treats as if they were human. And incredible as it seems, in his eyes no one is ignorant or a sinner. Many maintain that a sage alone can recognize a sage, and that therefore no one can positively assert that this one is a sage. This is not altogether true. He that is in earnest to find a competent guide, a true guru, on the path of deliverance, has to decide somehow whether the person he would elect to be a sage or not. And if he be of pure and devout mind, he will be aided by divine grace to make the right choice. It is also a help for him to understand the profound truths taught in the sage's revelation. We have already noticed a few of the marks of the real sage. A few more will be set down later. The mission of a born sage or messenger of God is twofold. He renews and confirms the essentials of the old revelation. He also serves as a center of divine grace to his disciples, especially to those who intuitively or through understanding of the sacred teaching recognize him as an embodiment of God, and therefore bear unto him the same devotion that they formerly bore to God, seeing no distinction between the two. This is in accordance with the spirit of the ancient sacred lore, which is expressed in the following verse. Obeisance to the Lord of divine wisdom, infinite like the sky, who is three in one, as God, Guru, and real self. It seems that for one who understands this truth and becomes a disciple and true devotee of the sage, it may not be quite necessary to go to the sage and live near him always. The sage transcends time and space and is therefore everywhere. We shall now make a study of the teachings of all the sages, always giving special prominence to those of this great sage.